Gloria and I, we kind of feel frustrated by this, is that like that's not really the course or the road we want to go down. Is like suddenly we need to be afraid of benzene in our sunscreen. You know, I think the at the time when all of this was fresh, there was a bunch of articles that came out about benzene, I guess benzene contamination, all of this. And I think the worst reaction we saw was just like immediately we saw lists of products come out being like, these are your top 10, top 12 benzene free sunscreens. We're like, that is not, we're just making up a fear.
Today on the show, we have Gloria and Victoria from Chemist Confessions. If you don't know Chemist Confessions, they are true educators. They really take pride in educating us on skincare science, ingredient science. They're both cosmetic chemists. They have their own brand, and their socials are just so educational. I learn something new from them all the time. And today we chat about the Valisure paper that just came out about BPO. Should we really be concerned about it? We chat about niacinamide and hyaluronic acid. Are they potentially irritating in higher concentrations? Are we using too much of it? We talk about how much sunscreen you should use. There is just so much technical but very digestible information in this podcast episode. You guys are going to love it. I think it's probably one of the most information-heavy episodes that we've had about skincare. So there's just a lot that you can apply to your own regimen to really kick it up a notch and just make sure that your skin is happy. So without further ado, here is Gloria and Victoria from Chemist Confessions. Okay, alrighty. So we're going to get right into it. And the first question I like to ask all my guests is, what is your favorite skincare memory? So maybe Victoria, will start with you, and then we'll go to Gloria.
Yeah, so definitely it's acne. I think that's the number one concern as a kid that would get me into skincare and also start me on some really bad skincare habits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I actually didn't get into skincare until college, which I think is relatively late because I have dry skin. So in my high school, middle school years, I was blessed with no acne, therefore no skincare needed. But in college, my skin got really, really dry because I moved from the South all the way to upstate New York, which was terrible for skin. And at that time, I kept trying products and none of them worked. My skin still felt parched. And I felt the need to keep spending more and more on my very limited college budget. And it wasn't until like years later that I realized that I was basically buying a bunch of, because at that time serums were kind of new to the scene. And if you go to the counter, they will always push for you to buy the newest essence, the newest serum that they say to be super hydrating. But I wasn't using anything to lock that moisture in. So I was just putting on water stuff on my face, hoping it will hydrate my face. But everything was just evaporating out at record speed. And it wasn't until like years later I was like, oh, that's where I messed up.
Yeah. I think that's a super common mistake that people are making because of the way these serums are marketed. And
Yeah.
we can definitely get into all of that. I wanted to chat with you guys about a few things that have been happening in the media lately, since you're the first cosmetic chemist we've had on in a little while, and I always like to hear your perspective, your expert perspective. And I think the most kind of glaring topic that we need to address is the latest Valisure paper on benzoyl peroxide. So if you guys could give the audience maybe some reassurance, some guidance. It's something that I'm getting in my DMs daily, as I'm sure you guys are too.
Yeah, sure. So definitely we're here for reassurance. We don't want anyone throwing out their BPO products, but basically what happened with the paper was that Valisure showed some results that showed that at certain high temperatures and heat over time, benzene was being released from these products. And so the issue with that is the FDA has come out with a limit. I believe it's 2 ppm, where nothing should exceed that amount. And because of that limit, what happened was a lot of these products were above that limit and significantly above. But we're here to basically reassure everyone that the issue that we have with the data is that they're all being heated at pretty high temperatures. So what was shared, I believe, Gloria, and you can correct me too, I believe it's at around 50, 55 degrees.
I think they had two temperatures being shared,
Yeah.
one at 50 degrees Celsius, one at 70 degrees Celsius, which is aggressively high. They also tested in the paper they stated that they tested at a more moderate, I think 35 or 40. But interesting enough, that data wasn't shared. So
Yeah. So with that, the reason why we aren't incredibly alarmed by this is because that is a kind of torture test that not even we do in product testing, because that is extreme torture test that wouldn't be a good representation of how a product would age over time. The reason why anybody would be heating products is we call it an accelerated stability test, kind of like your QA/QC step. Because obviously we can't wait around 3 to 5 years to see what would happen to these formulas. So instead we do this kind of accelerated testing. And so that's why we just want to reassure everyone that unfortunately, the data, although it's very alarming, and I think one thing we try to hint is, or want to point out, is definitely check your y-axis. They're all like different scales. So like the bar graphs can seem very drastic, but the main takeaway here is that, it's hard to really apply this data to any real life scenario unless you are planning to bake your BPO products in very high temperatures. Maybe you're leaving it in cars for a few days. So that would be our general takeaway here. And I think Gloria and I have one other aspect we want to share, is that if you look at the products that were tested, they do show like an initial benzene amount. And I believe most of these do fall under the FDA limit. But there are a couple that we do acknowledge are slightly questionable arenas. But those that were questionable are not any type of product, for the most part, that could be purchased in store. So that was the one thing we just wanted to point out, to just give our most objective analysis of the data shared. Yeah.
Okay. And actually, since we're on the topic, Valisure has done other studies in the past with other products. Do you have a similar takeaway from those, or do you view those differently? There was one for a lot of aerosol sunscreens. And I think there was another one as well. I can't recall.
I think the most recent one that caused a stir was sunscreen from last year. And it's a slightly different take, because the sunscreen batch that was alerted was essentially, it was a contamination in the production process, and the levels that were quote unquote caught were even lower than that of this BPO study. And essentially this did cause a ripple effect in the industry, where some products were recalled, lots were examined. And that's the thing with what proper OTC products like sunscreen is, there should be a protocol where manufacturers can go through not just how the production went, all the raw materials that were procured for that production, for that lot number, are all documented, so they can go back, track down what was wrong, and then figure out, hey, what was the issue here? Which ingredient was it? And all that was corrected. And in practice, it's a pretty different scenario than the BPO case, where they're saying BPO, essentially they're implying that BPO almost inherently wasn't safe because the benzene was coming from the raw material itself. Whereas on the sunscreen side, it was one contaminated batch. And I believe now that's been course corrected, and people shouldn't worry.
I noticed after that kind of hit mainstream media, now when I look at some sunscreens on the website, it will say benzene free, which always gives me a chuckle. But So for the consumer, can you explain, does a brand have to do testing on the final product to be able to say that? Or are they literally just saying, we don't put benzene in our product, which nobody does?
It's not a regulated term, so it could be either or, and I'm going to guess it would be the latter. Then, yeah, obviously they wouldn't formulate with benzene. No one would, just because it would save them some dollars on testing.
Yeah.
I want to say that bigger companies, if really big brands are putting that on, I would say they're probably testing on the final product just to be on the safer side in terms of legals, or if people wanted to come after them. But as a whole, yeah, like Victoria said, all bets are off.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing Gloria and I, we kind of feel frustrated by this, is that like that's not really the course or the road we want to go down, is like suddenly we need to be afraid of benzene in our sunscreen. I think the at the time when all of this was fresh, there was a bunch of articles that came out about benzene contamination, all of this. And I think the worst reaction we saw was just like immediately we saw lists of products come out being like, these are your top 10, top 12 benzene free sunscreens. We're like, that is not, we're just making up a fear, you know, and it's just not helpful to the consumer to feel like, oh my God, sunscreens already feel like such a, I guess, almost like a, well, what am I trying to say? Like such a kind of misunderstood category with probably needs a better PR team behind it. But now we add another fear behind it. So that was, you know, kind of tough for us to see. And so hopefully, yeah, everyone listening feels some security in that and that, you know, take it from us as the formulators. We all want to create safe products and it's just not something we typically are worried about. Yeah.
And since we are on the topic of sunscreens, what are your views as experts on chemical sunscreens? Because this is a question I get all the time. And even some people commenting when I do any sort of content on sunscreen itself saying, you know, that they feel torn because they obviously want to protect their skin not only from photoaging and skin cancer, but they're afraid of the potential toxic side effects of sunscreen. So what can you tell us about that?
Sunscreen safe is a lot safer than people give it credit for. We want to say to the consumers that we totally understand where it's coming from because, you know, when you're just trying to do right for your skin, for your family's skin, seeing an article about how it gets in the bloodstream, about how it can be potentially causing cancer is very, very scary. And no one wants to be making that choice for themselves. But based on everything we've seen so far, sunscreen is incredibly safe. And the FDA, I guess to get into the weeds a little bit with that, is there is more tests being done, but the test data that came up initially wasn't, the way it was portrayed is kind of blown out of proportion. They're talking about how, oh, just using sunscreen, it definitely gets in the sun, it gets into the bloodstream. But what's never discussed is the nuance of concentration and metabolism, right? Is what's getting into your bloodstream actually harmful? They're using this nanogram per liter level that is basically applied to every substance. And we all know that any substance at the right concentration can be toxic and harmful, including things like salt and even water. So to give across the board the same cap of limit isn't helpful. And that's one of the things that they needed to get into more, look at the nuance of each sunscreen ingredient to say, hey, is this considered okay? What's the problem? Is it formula dependent? So all that stuff is ongoing, but nothing indicated that that level is harmful for your body. And the takeaway is still, sun is still the enemy here. Like skin cancer is no joke. I think most people's sunscreen habits, like on average, is kind of on the poor side to begin with. Last year, Victoria and I did a sunscreen application series where we tested a bunch of sunscreens, and in that we talked about how to apply the right amount. And just that concept alone is very difficult for people, the average consumer, to understand that like more is more with sunscreen. Most people are under applying. So generally speaking, that's still the enemy here. And at the end of the day, if you want to go mineral to be quote unquote safer, you can, but a sunscreen is only as good as how much you're willing to use.
And how much should we be using, right? We see the 2-finger rule, the 3-finger rule. We see a quarter of a teaspoon, half a teaspoon. What's your rule of thumb?
So we find that the quarter teaspoon is actually probably the closest measurement, but it's not realistic because who's going to be carrying around a quarter teaspoon everywhere? So we like to say 3 fingers but the problem with that is there's obviously variance with the type of packaging that you're using, right? Think of the spout at which the sunscreen is coming out of. That width can obviously change the amount that you're applying on skin. So we would say like for, your typical sunscreens that we see that use kind of a skinnier nozzle, 3 fingers seems to really do the job. But we have other like body sunscreens with a much fatter orifice, and you probably only need 2, So I think we've also done those studies too, and we've just found on average that with 2 fingers, it just doesn't feel like it's hitting enough to cover the face, whereas 3 fingers, it's like it's like above average. So that was kind of our sweet spot there with those rules. Yeah.
That's a great rule of thumb. And I think too, not only the nozzle, but the vehicle, right? Like a cream or I mean, a lotion or a liquid is so different. Also, how fast you're moving. I mean, you can do one little line that's real thin, or you could take your time. So I always tell my patients, measure whatever sunscreen you're going to wear, measure it out 1 time to 1/4 teaspoon. And that way, at least you know what it's going to look like on the palm of your hand. You have an idea. You don't have to measure it every time, but just get an idea for how much it is, because it's definitely more than most people are inherently using.
Yeah. And we've told people that just remember that, in actual SPF testing, it's measured by weight. So because of that, if you think of even just different formula types, from foams to oils, these volumes all can seem very different. So your typical sunscreen oil will actually need a lot more. It's just inherently lighter, right? And then for a foam, which I think are becoming more popular now, we aim for a golf ball size in the palm of your hand. And that would be kind of a good estimate. We actually did those fun studies last year as well. And that was also fun, trying to get everything into the right measurement. Just some of it was just crazy. We wouldn't be able to do the three finger rule at all.
Yeah. That's so helpful. I'm gonna find those and link them below, because then at least I think for most people, probably unlike you guys and unlike me, we're trying new products all the time. But for most people, they have one sunscreen they use probably for months or years. So once they get that right amount down, they don't have to think about it. So I'll link those below. I think that'll be super helpful.
For sure.
Okay, I want to get to some more fun content, talk about some of the more fun ingredients that we're hearing about. And one ingredient that's had a moment for a while now is niacinamide. And now I think that more and more people are using niacinamide, and it's in more and more products. We're starting to see a little bit of that backlash of people saying it's irritating them. So I want to hear from you. Are we using too much? What's the best approach? Maybe best concentrations, because I think that's also, these brands are going higher and higher. So for somebody who is using niacinamide and they're seeing some sort of reaction, how would you approach that?
That's a great question. We love that topic. And excuse my sick cat in question, who's very much
he needs some love. It's
comfort.
Okay.
Yeah. So we from the data on the clinical side, all the testing we've seen on niacinamide is done between 2 to 5%, which is what we suggest people aim for. And like you said, brands are just going crazy with percentages. I think niacinamide was popularized in part with the Ordinary's 10% product. And people are just at this point trained to think 10% is the standard. And when they see for products that aim for even higher than that, it just feels like, oh, more is more, right? But we haven't seen anything that indicates that niacinamide is a product which efficacy scales with concentration. And usually concentration is where you get yourself in trouble. It's a relatively vanilla ingredient, so not everyone will experience that irritation when they bump up the level. But we are willing to wager that if you're seeing that come up, that's a very likely culprit, not just from one product that's at 10%, but from layering products that all have niacinamide. Victoria, have seen it in cleansers, in your serums, moisturizers, which we do like as a support ingredient in moisturizers, in your retinol products. So you might have a full routine of 8 steps, and they all have niacinamide. So as a recommendation, we would suggest people just kind of decode your ingredients first, make sure where you're getting your niacinamide from and how much. Victoria always suggests that if you have a cream or moisturizer that has lower doses of niacinamide right in that 2 to 5% range, it's perfect. That's all you need. You don't really need a serum. But if you love your niacinamide serum, let that be the only product that has niacinamide.
Yeah, I get so many questions, from patients and followers that should I use niacinamide? And my answer is always, you probably already are. If you just look, if you're using a 5-step routine, I'm guessing one of those, your serum, your sunscreen, or your moisturizer probably has niacinamide in it already.
Yes, 100%.
Okay, next ingredient that is having a moment is hypochlorous acid. So I'd love to hear from you. I'm sure you've seen the videos of people saying, why don't I just use Clorox wipes on my face? It's the same thing. So give us the lowdown on hypochlorous acid. Is it beneficial for the skin, and how to use it also, because there's also a lot of talk out there about it deactivating other ingredients in your routine.
Yeah. So Okay, so I think people feel like, oh, isn't hypochlorous acid just bleach? And we're going to just say right now it is not. It may feel like that because the molecules in it are the same, but what's really important here is the pH, right? So your bleach is going to be a much higher alkaline pH, whereas hypochlorous acid you're going to do in a generally lower, like I think they typically want to keep it between, if I remember,
3 and
3 to
5.
5. Yeah.
Yeah, under.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and in terms of its benefits, it started out in, general like wound care, as a disinfectant, and to be honest, that's where a lot of the data lies. So what Gloria and I like to say is we can see a place for this in terms of being a good soothing ingredient. The buzz around it has made it almost feel like this miracle ingredient, this miracle drug, right? But we generally feel like, at most what you can use it for is for those soothing benefits that you're looking for to keep skin calm. Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Sorry, I was just going to add in terms of it deactivating other products and whatnot. We haven't seen a lot of those talks. It's based in theory on what it would interact with in your other skincare. But generally speaking, we don't see any data supporting it or testing in one way or another. So we would say it's probably fine. And like Victoria mentioned, if you're using it for soothing benefits, your routine, if your skin is in that state where you need it to calm down your whatever it is, it should be on the simpler side anyway. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. And what about hyaluronic acid? That's another ingredient that's in absolutely everything. Is it true, number one, that it can actually dry your skin out if you're not applying an occlusive over top? And can it irritate the skin?
Ooh, okay. HA is another one where if you are using a more than 3-step routine, it's probably already in your routine. It's incredibly prevalent. Is it true that it can dry out skin by itself or as an ingredient? It's a water grabber, right? It won't dry your skin out per se, but kind of like I mentioned in the very beginning of the episode, if you're only using a completely water-based serum and not layering a cream and something with emollient or occlusive on top, then yeah, your skin's going to feel a little dry, but that's not HA's fault per se. And in terms of irritation, anyone can have a reaction to anything. The regular hydrating large molecular weight hyaluronic acid should be relatively vanilla. Most people should be perfectly fine with that ingredient. Nowadays, we do see more uses for lower weight molecular weight HA, and it's often advertised for anti-aging or other more beyond hydration benefits. We would say those, from what we see, have a higher chance of irritation than the big size HA.
Okay. And is it something we can use too much of, similar to niacinamide?
I use too much of. It's relative in a sense that if you use your very generic hyaluronic acid, the bigger size molecules, the 2 million kilodalton ones, you actually only need very little. We're talking like in the 0.1 to 0.5% range. And so in a sense, like we've seen serums that, now a lot of them now are blends of all different sizes, and those ranges are a lot higher. So it can be anywhere from 2 to higher, 2 and plus. And so I think in that sense, I wouldn't say it's going to ever hit probably the percentages that niacinamide ever hits, and I really hope not, because that is that is a waste of space. But as far as too much, I don't necessarily think so, but I will say, kind of just to support what Gloria was saying before, is with the lower molecular weight HAs, we definitely have noticed, even for some of our followers, they are cognizant of having too much of that specific one, even at lower levels, can sometimes aggravate their dryness. So that would be more of an anecdote than actual data that we have.
Okay. And next ingredient, Bacuchiol. Is it the new retinol? If not, does it have a place in skincare? And what are the benefits of using it, even if it's not the new retinol?
Yeah.
Of all the plant retinols, I feel like sometimes people hear us go through our content, they almost expect anything that gets positioned as a retinol alternative to be bashed by us. But compared to other ingredients, we would say, as far as retinol alternatives go, this is one of the best options you can have. It's one of the few that has actually been tested against actual retinol. So if your skin absolutely cannot tolerate a retinol, yes, it has a place in your routine. Given that it's newer, it just simply doesn't have as much data as retinol. So if you already have a retinol or a different retinoid that you love and use in your routine, we don't see a need to switch to a Bacuchiol. We also say that with this, we want to caution people that this and many other retinol alternatives, they get positioned as a gentle version of retinol. From what we see in testing, it actually can cause redness and other signs of irritation. It's not completely fully vanilla. And the other claim that we kind of want to warn people against is that it also gets positioned as a pregnancy safe retinol, but it's, while molecularly speaking, it's not a retinoid. It has never been studied in that capacity. So you really shouldn't be making those claims.
Mm-hmm. This episode is brought to you by, well, me. Skinthusiast.com is your one-stop shop for all things skin, hair, and beauty. I have countless blog posts to educate you on all the skin concerns and most common skin questions I receive. We also have a complete skincare basics guide on our shop page, as well as the cutest In My Skin era crew necks. If you want to support the show, please head over to skinthusiast.com/shop, and don't forget to rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. How about ceramides on acneic skin? Any recommendations there? Because I think moisturizers can be tough sometimes for people with acne because maybe they don't like the feeling. And we know that ceramides can be really beneficial for those with acne. So I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, so I'm really glad you asked this question because as a fellow acne person, I'd just like to share that there's actual studies on ceramides for acneic skin types where they've seen how in the wintertime, those acne individuals will actually see a significant depletion in their ceramide levels. And so in a way, it does make sense that, ceramide, because ceramides contribute to our general skin barrier health, is important to have these barrier helpers in our skincare. So to answer your question, yes, we're all for that. And we do agree that oftentimes a lot of ceramide moisturizers can be very heavy. And that's because ceramides themselves are inherently waxy. And we have a very difficult, chemists will tell you, a very difficult time formulating with these true ceramides. They just don't really like to go into much, and so it really takes a finesse to really get it into formula. However, we will say, if you can use a ceramide moisturizer, great. We love it ourselves. We put it in both our balm and our own moisturizer. But there are also other lipid substances, fatty acids, cholesterol, things like that can also help. So, the idea is, while we say, if you feel like you're struggling and you're just like, I can't with these moisturizers, I haven't really found the one, it's just important to just cover your moisturizing basis. I think when you asked me about my memory, it's like, and I mentioned how it's like set me on track for the worst routine ever. It was because all I was trying to do was dry my skin out. I refused to put on moisturizer. I put a bunch of alcohol treatments on my skin, and ultimately that made the healing so much worse. And in order to help prevent scarring, to improve the way your acne heals, moisturizing and making sure your skin barrier is healthy, those are all key to really set you up for success. So I would say, please go for it if you can.
Do you have any specific brands that you would recommend maybe for somebody who is in that same place where they're just very hesitant to put moisturizer on their skin, but ones that you recommend with ceramides in them?
Yeah, so I think, I would say the cheapest way to try this out, and it's probably the most smack dab in the middle in terms of texture, would be CeraVe's, I believe, their PM moisturizer. Okay. I think that one will be like a good test because that already is on the lighter spectrum. Mm-hmm. And then and I think it's relatively cheaper than, a SkinCeuticals triple lipid. So that would probably be my litmus test for you guys.
And the moisturizer that you guys have that has ceramides in it, what's the texture like? Do you recommend it for somebody? What skin type would you recommend it for?
Mr. Reliable is formulated for all skin types. It's a lighter, layerable gel moisturizer. It's really funny because we've had people with oily skin say, oh, this is the perfect consistency. We've had dry skin people say, oh, this is the perfect consistency. But on the flip side, we also have dry skin people say, oh, this is really light. This is practically a serum. So what our recommendation is, it's a bit of that little bit goes a long way type of product. If you have dry skin like myself, a full pump will cover your moisturizing needs. Whereas if you have oily skin, half a pump is enough to just smooth over your skin, form a very thin layer to help with moisturization.
Okay, perfect. We'll link that one below for anybody who wants to try it. And I want to switch gears a little bit to vitamin C. So we got lots of viewer questions, and I have questions that I get all the time too that I'd love to hear your guys' take on. So brands will often claim that their L-ascorbic acid serums are still active even when they start to turn brown because they're stabilized in some way. And I would love to hear what you guys say about that because there's kind of two camps on this. There's big brands that say, no, that LAA is still active. And then there's people who say, I won't even touch my vitamin C serum once it starts to turn into dark orange.
I think there's a range where it's okay. You don't need to throw it out at the first sign of coloring. We always say that going from clear to that like light yellow to even that light amber is probably okay. But once you get into that really dark amber category, then we haven't seen any data that supports that it's okay. Generally speaking, we rely on clinical studies done by either the big brands or by academia and kind of weigh it out a little bit. But the reality is it's not that straightforward. It's not like there's a study that purposely gives someone a fresh versus an amber colored vitamin C. But I know some brands have tested the not super fresh ones and validate it in some way somehow. So it's not super straightforward, but our stance is like middle of the road with that.
Okay, that's good to hear because I think sometimes people get discouraged because they pay lots of money for their antioxidant serum and then they feel like they can't use it for very long. And also storage. How do you recommend storing these L-ascorbic acid serums?
Vampire setting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Vampire setting. I love that.
Go for it.
Yeah, so cool and dark and away from the sun.
I love that vampire setting. That's so funny. Okay, that's a great recommendation. What do you think about putting them in the fridge?
It can help. It can definitely help. So, I mean, it's dark inherently, and the cool temperature will slow any degradation for sure. It just kind of depends on your habit. There's nothing wrong with putting in the fridge and pulling out, using it every day. But I know some people might put it in the fridge and then set it and forget it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
The most important thing is using it, and then second most because there's no point in storing it correctly if you're never going to use it.
Exactly. And something else I wanted to add is what people don't really talk about is they look at the color test, which is an important indication for vitamin C. Another way to tell is the gas test. When you open it and you hear that psst come out, that's not a good sign because carbon dioxide is one of the byproducts. So if you're storing it for a long time, you open it and there's some gas come out, that's kind of normal. If it's a lot of gas to the point where the pipette is, if you think your pipette's getting fatter, that's kind of teetering into that danger territory. Or if you're using it almost daily or daily as you should, and you still hear that buildup of gas, and that's dying very rapidly, and that's also not good.
Interesting. And if someone does apply this oxidized serum, is it actually harmful to the skin in some way, or is it just not doing what it's supposed to do?
It's just not doing what it's supposed to do. I know there's a lot of fear and potential pro-oxidation, but
exactly.
The idea would be that it's just become ineffective.
Okay, great. I get a lot of very scared DMs about this. For those who can't tolerate L-ascorbic acid, is there any efficacious derivatives that you would recommend that are better for sensitive skin?
Yeah, so in terms of vitamin C derivatives, we like magnesium ascorbyl phosphate and sodium ascorbyl phosphate. We find that these two do have some data behind it as being an antioxidant. While it can't compete with ascorbic acid just because it just has such a long historical data, or I guess timeline of data behind it, we find these would be two great avenues, although MAP is a bit harder to find. There's like probably only a couple that do actually include it, and the percentage, it's not completely transparent, so it's hard to know. Sodium ascorbyl phosphates also has some nice acne data, so that would be another one that's we typically recommend for oily skin individuals. But if you're just done with the vitamin C category in general, we also recommend resveratrol. That's another one. It's a lot of these antioxidants are funky. They're not stable. They need a lot of chemist love, basically. So resveratrol is another one that's actually going to turn colors on you as well. But there is some nice data around that one if formulated well.
Okay, that's good to know, because I think there are a lot of people searching for antioxidants that are not vitamin C.
Yeah,
and that's hard to do online, because once you search antioxidant serum, you're getting mostly vitamin C options.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on THD ascorbate?
Yeah, so it's just another aspect in stabilizing ascorbic acid. So this time around, it's an encapsulation technique. So they're taking a gold particle and they're going to coat it with ascorbic acid. And sometimes they'll coat it with other actives as well. But the idea is that by, this conjugation, this bond, you stabilize ascorbic acid for a much, much longer shelf life. So we find this promising. The thing is about it is that it's really hard for us to compare with actual ascorbic acid. The use level is going to be completely different, just because encapsulation throws a wrench in all of the data we know, right? So the concentration you're going to be using, the amount used. So because of that, some people obviously want to know, it's like, should I be using this over ascorbic acid? At this point, we don't know. It's really new, but we do recommend it for people who are just absolutely over the shelf life. Like they just don't want to deal with it. They don't want to think about it. And we'll say, okay, then this is new. Give this a try, right? So that would probably be if you find yourself in that arena, this may be that option for you. But the concentrations, you're not going to be following the typical 5 to 20%. This is going to be on a much lower scale just because of the technology. Yeah.
That's good to know. So people don't necessarily need to look for that same percentage when they're looking for a gold stabilized.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little bit from ingredients to skincare myths and misconceptions. And I want to start by asking you both, is there one that drives you nuts that you hear over and over that you want to debunk?
Ooh. I feel like I have a different answer every time I get asked
this,
and just that
whatever's
depends
top of
on
mind.
the season. Yeah.
I think the one that Gloria and I recently have been like debating on, I'll just use this opportunity to talk about, is should you be putting products on damp or dry skin? That is the thing that is just like, it seems people are become hyper aware of this situation, this key moment in time. And I don't know if this is necessarily a debunk, but we do want to say that in all of the data and all of the clinical testing that is run through brands and academia, there is very many, or I guess most of these papers are not instructing individuals to apply on damp or dry skin. It's just not, it's almost a time point that they just have no control over. They already want to make sure that is the subject able to, follow this protocol of using this product routinely. If they can even just get the subjects to do that, then great. So I think that was the one thing I would just put out there, is be like, if you find yourself worrying over this scenario, I guarantee you all of those ascorbic acid serum papers, all of the studies that they did, they were not, damp or dry was not really the issue here. So hopefully that gives people peace of mind if they do find themselves like worrying about this. Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on it from like a biological perspective? Is there a world where it makes sense to you that applying to damp skin is going to increase penetration? Or do you think we just don't know?
Your skin being damp does help with penetration of water-based ingredients. That's not a question, but because I should back up a little bit and say the outermost layer of your skin is mostly fatty and there's not a lot of water content to begin with. So that's why water-based ingredients have a hard time penetrating. So yes, if you super soak your skin, let's say if you use a face mask beforehand and whatnot, will it help enhance the efficacy? Yeah, absolutely. But if you towel down your face thoroughly after washing and then apply, that difference is incredibly minuscule that you're not going to find a difference in efficacy. And there's nothing out there that shows that, oh, I need to be practically dripping before I apply these products. So that's a little bit too nuanced. And I did want to add another myth that drives me crazy, and I rant about it about twice a year, is any sort of blank rich extracts really drive me up the walls. Like you hear stuff like, oh, blah, blah, blah extract has 80,000 times the vitamin C compared to oranges, or like, did you know that this oil has natural forms of retinol? Like things like that. I guarantee you that is too, like if you're talking about 5 to 9% vitamin C or the 0.3 to 0.5% or 1% retinol that you're aiming for, I guarantee you, even if you use these extracts neat, you're not getting anything close to that. Yeah. And it just like drives me crazy when those products get launched.
It is funny. And it always makes me think that there's someone just sitting in a room somewhere thinking of what kind of like claims they can make, based on the ingredients that they're using. Like what's going to like get the consumer the most, or what's going to sound the most outrageous. It's so funny, some of these claims that they have.
100%.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple of myths that I've been seeing, a lot of these are not new. A lot of these have been, touted for years. But the first one being that you can't use retinol in the daytime.
False.
Why do you think that one came about, and what do you think about it?
I think it came about because there's a perception. Well, retinol is an ingredient that causes sensitivity very frequently, and a lot of times people associate that like when you have those new when your skin's going through retinization, it's sensitive, you have new cells coming, that plus the sun equals bad things. And they think by using it during the day, that effect is somehow enhanced and it will become toxic and your skin will burn. Regardless of when and where you use retinol, you should be using sunscreen to protect your skin. So it's not really a matter of when you use it, it's your sunscreen habit that's more important here.
And that's the same with our acids too, right? The ones that are photosensitizing. I see a lot like, you can't use that in the morning. I'm like, well, you're still going to have the same photosensitivity if you're using it at night. So
yeah, exactly.
It's really, sunscreen is just basically always the answer.
Yes.
And also, we always tell people like a lot of acne individuals have a really stacked routine. And there's just no way they're going to be able to put that cocktail in just their night routine.
Yeah,
and so
true.
they have to split it in the morning and night. So I feel like for any acne users out there that have a big regimen, they probably are like they know that it's just like it's not possible, and they have to split it out to the daytime.
Yeah, and I think actually I use a lot of AHA, BHA cleansers for my patients, those who don't really need a leave-on product. And I always recommend using that in the morning. Not only are you going to get that, it gives you a little bit of that immediate glow because it helps to exfoliate immediately, but also then you don't have to also stack it with your retinoid at night, especially if you're using like a prescription. So it's nice to like break it up. And I find people tolerate that a lot better than trying to use a peel pad or some sort of leave-on with their retinoid. It just gets a little bit confusing and people have no idea how to structure that. I think it's one of those like kind of mind-boggling concepts for them to figure out how to schedule out their retinoid and acids.
Totally.
Okay, adapalene. Does it have anti-aging benefits like other retinoids, or is it meant only for acne?
We would say for what most people are getting it, just focus on the acne aspect. This is because most people are getting adapalene OTC now at that lower level, and at that concentration, if you're buying a different gel just from your local CVS, that concentration has not been tested for anti-aging. It's that higher prescription only 0.3 level that has some data, but even then, the amount of testing that's done is not a lot compared to other retinoids. So we really consider adapalene more acne focused.
And the testing that has been done, is it similar to like a tretinoin for anti-aging, or is it still less? And we know there's fewer studies, but what do those studies actually show?
I was going to say they're general early indication that it's a global test on photoaging symptoms. So that includes anything from pigmentation, fine lines and wrinkles. I forget the age range that they're testing, but I don't believe their study is on deeper wrinkles yet for adapalene.
Okay, and while we are on the topic of retinoids, one myth that I want to bust is that retinol is dangerous because it's been banned in the UK. This is something that all of a sudden I started seeing a bunch of comments about in the last couple of months. So can you enlighten us a little bit about this?
Yes. So the EU banned the use of retinol higher than 0.3%. And I think their general stance is, and we should mention that the EU definitely is one that takes a much more conservative approach, and they definitely have probably the largest force behind and largest governing body in terms of regulating cosmetics globally. And so their stance is that generally they're concerned with just too much retinol. There's just too much retinol use out there. It's also being misused a lot, and sadly, that's kind of why Gloria and I feel the need to, continue with the education portion of Chemist Confessions. Is just that there's just not enough education around using retinoids correctly and retinol. Retinol still can be it can be very potent at 1%. And so I think that's the general stance here. It's not that retinol is not safe. It's just that there needs to be proper support and educational guidance. And the EU feels that at this rate, then it just might as well be prescribed and be monitored by experts like doctors, right?
That makes so much more sense when you
Yeah.
put it that way.
Yeah. So, and it's fair because I think the issue with the beauty industry is that they always make you want to reach for more, right? You want to, like, I forget when Gloria and I first started, it was all about like, are you getting enough out of your products? And now the pendulum has swung in the completely opposite direction, where there's just way too much in a lot of these products. Too much niacinamide. There's too much. The retinol percentages are now very confusing, where you hear about things like 4.5% retinol. It's just not, it's so confusing for a user to really figure out a place to start. And so I think I can definitely understand why. And Gloria and I actually just last year, one of the big learnings we had was that people had a sense of FOMO when it came to retinoids, right? Like it made them feel like, okay, I can only get retinol, but I really should be aiming for tretinoin. We're like, no, we actually came out with a series explaining how, the pathways and the benefits are actually the same. It's just different grades, and that's okay, and retinol is the same way. You don't always have to punch for higher. It's okay if skin's doing well on the percentage that you're using. That doesn't mean it's time to keep like notch up and bump up to the next level. And I think it's hard to curb that want, the want for better results, right? So I think that's the general, probably the phenomenon that's happened. And obviously with social media, that's kind of ignited that sense of FOMO. And so, Gloria and I can understand, but we just like to stay with proper guidance. A 1% retinol, if you're in the States and you're using a 1% retinol, it's going to be okay. It's totally fine and safe.
I think I want to use a slightly different example to highlight. I think just outside of the US, the different regulatory bodies, they're more concerned about any level of potential irritation with any cosmetics. Category like AHAs, if you look at glycolic acid, I think Canada caps it at 10 and then China caps it at 6, which sounds really low if you look at what products are available in the States. And you look at the testing that's actually done academically, that to get that efficacy, you do want to use at higher levels. And on one hand, I think it's great that we're in the States where, we can formulate home peels and really help people achieve better skin or like more visible results at home with proper guidance. It's just that some other regulatory bodies don't feel like it's just like too much. Like they don't want to deal with any level of irritation and complaint, so they cap it a lot lower than here in the US. And that's not to say that, so is it actually dangerous above that level? Like Victoria said, it's how you use it, it's how we formulate it, and the directions are given are all really important here.
I'm really glad that we touched on that, because I think I'm sure you guys see all the content online about the UK banned this, the UK banned that, and it's just this whole conversation here now. So it's nice to understand why they might be banning some of these ingredients and why it doesn't mean that we have to worry about them. It's just all about how the use is different.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of wrap-up questions for both of you. I would love to know how many steps are in each of your skincare routines.
I think for me, it's probably around 4, I think. So I'm thinking cleanser. I've got my vitamin C serum, moisturizer, and sunscreen. And sometimes that'll drop to 3 during the summer, where just vitamin C and sunscreen alone is enough for me. Yeah. So
For me, I have dry skin, so it's a little bit longer face wash, and I use our Aquafix as a hydrating serum, and that's a staple throughout the year. I don't change that step ever. And usually a product that I'm testing, whether it's an active ingredient
yeah, that's
or
true.
if it's vitamin C, if it's a retinoids, which I've been off for some time now because I'm preggers, that I save a step for that. And a moisturizer. And moisturizer is one where I do use our Mr. Reliable for the most part, but at the same time, that is a category where we are constantly testing new products to see. So I'll play around with either Mr. Reliable plus whatever I'm testing versus just a test product to kind of play around with how skin feels with that. So probably in that 5-step area, we don't really use like area specific products. Like I think a lot of people will have an eye cream as part of their steps. That is something I've definitely not like bothered with very much unless I'm testing something.
Yeah, I'm gonna plug our retinol, which is 0.3%, so it will not be banned. But basically, our own retinol was a challenge to kind of get rid of the eye cream step. It's called Double Play, and the reason for that name is because you can use it for face and eye. So I should mention at night that is part of my routine to save everyone a step, to save everyone from buying a little jar, but also because Gloria and I, we just like to set up challenges for ourselves. We wanted to see if we could create a retinol that a derm would approve for the use of eye, but you could still get benefits for full face, which is hard to do because the eye area is thinner. You've got thinner skin. So yeah, on that note, I would just like to say we tried.
That's exciting. And I think it's funny because I see less and less about product specific or area specific products now. And it's funny, I don't generally use an eye cream. I sometimes will, but generally I don't. And I always get that question like, oh, you don't use an eye cream? And I'm like, no, I just use everything else there. Like, and that's not for everybody, but for the most part, a lot of these products can be used. And especially if you have something that's formulated specifically with that in mind. And how did you guys, at what point did you decide to start your own brand? What was happening? What gave you the idea? Especially as you're formulating for so many other people, and then you just kind of decide to go on your own.
I think it was about a year or half a year into doing content, then we realized we're very unemployed. And it was either we get other jobs or we, do this for real because the content was eating up a lot of our time. But if we were to get other jobs in the industry, that might tie our hands at what kind of content we can do. If we leave the industry altogether, then we also lose that connection and we no longer know, like the latest and greatest in this field. So we're like, you know what? I think it was that 20s energy at the time too. We're like, we're going to do this. We're going to make our own products. And it was driven mostly by just excitement about not formulating under marketing's thumb that drove us to creating our line.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is just, I think the content really, or I shouldn't even say it's not the content, it's the feedback from the content that gave Gloria and I that little bit of hope. It's like, hey, it seems like people do want something that's more transparent. They might actually find a place for the chemist expertise, and they could value that voice, and so I think, yeah, man, we were so young back then. And it was very, I think when I think about that time with Gloria and I was like, oh, we were so cute. Aww. But anyways, that's just how that started. And now we're like 9, almost 10 products in. It's been exciting.
And for someone who's new to the brand, what's 1 or 2 that you would recommend to start with?
Ooh. All right, Gloria, you can say yours and I'll say mine.
I always recommend the Aquafix Mist Reliable 1-2 punch because it's a familiar familiar place. Aquafix can be considered a hydrating serum for those with dry skin, or for those with oily skin, it can be a one and done. And Mr. Reliable is just an easy pleasing moisturizer. And I always think those are great entry points to our brand because they're familiar product types, but we definitely have a chemist flair about how we went about choosing the ingredients that go into it, how much active we pack into it. And we are proud to say that those are one of our top, some of our top repurchased products because it becomes staples once they kind of realize that nuance difference.
Yeah. And I'm gonna take a left turn, and I'm gonna say, for me, I think it's 3 products, but I actually do just want to shout out our AHA boosters. Mainly because I think AHAs are so not glamorous. They're just not, I think the term chemical exfoliant is just so bleh to people, but it is such a undervalued step. No one realizes how important cell turnover and healthy cell turnover is to general healthy skin. It's such a, I don't know, I think it's just the story just isn't sexy, but I would recommend that if you don't have a good AHA in your life, our 3 boosters, there's those 3 to choose from. We actually formulated the 3 based on the type of AHA user you might be. So we have our oily skin type, we have our expert AHA user, which is gold standard, and we have our gentle dry skin and those who might have been scarred by their previous AHA experience, and that's baby steps. So those can be used multiple ways. Gloria and I pride ourselves as chemists to see if we can push the limits of these formulas, to see if you can use them in multiple ways so that the user has the full control of how they want to use their skincare and adapt it to their routine. So with these AHAs, they can use it as a nightly booster or a wash-off mask. Yeah.
That's so unique. I've never heard of anything like that before. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, Victoria, Gloria, thank you so much for coming on the show. I feel like we got to a lot, and I didn't even I got to maybe 70% of the questions. So the audience was really excited to hear from you both. So I'm glad we got to at least the majority of it. And thank you for taking the time. I know you're both super busy. So thanks for coming on to answer our questions.
Thanks for having us, Amy.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Gloria and Victoria, for coming on the show. I know you're both super busy, and I'm just so glad that we were able to get to so many questions for the audience. We are going to do a giveaway of some of Chemist Confessions' top products. So all you have to do is follow Chemist Confessions on Instagram, follow me at Amy Koberling, and let us know in my latest reel about this episode what your biggest takeaway was from this episode. Maybe you changed something about your routine, maybe you're adding or taking away an ingredient. Let us know what tangible tips you took away from this, and I'll see you next week, skin enthusiasts.